This presentation explores a variety of perspectives on myth and mythology towards defining myth. Anyone interested in myths and exploring the stories that move the world will find one or another of the definitions presented here meaningful or useful. Which one would you choose? Overall, defining myth for oneself is an important place to start. I always start by discussing a variety of definitions of any of the topics I teach, because determining what we are talking about and through that discussion delineating what we are not talking about is useful to the pursuit of any knowledge. Let's begin by looking at some of David Leeming's discussion from his book, The World of Myth, from 1990, chapter 1 of his book. Most people don't think further than the common definition of myth as a falsehood, an old wives' tale, or something that people believe that is not true, nor substantiated by fact. People say, that's just a myth, meaning that's not true. Or you'll see things like common myths about aging, or current headlines, common myths about COVID that you should stop believing now. People don't generally consider myths beyond this very basic common definition. This is not my definition, but Leeming cites it as the first one of many. The most basic academic definition, also cited by Campbell in the book Power of Myth, is that myths are stories of gods and heroes that had religious significance or have current day religious meaning. Whatever you think of myth, the stories are important enough to tell our children. This also then brings in legends, folk tales, fairy tales, and even perhaps exaggerated history as somehow belonging to a broad definition of myth. Myths are metaphors. They stand as symbols of deeper meaning or answers to grand questions about the origin of the universe or life. Leeming also distinguishes the definition of myth from mythology. Often people equivocate, including Campbell, equating myth with mythology, using the terms interchangeably to mean the same thing. However, I believe it is better to accept Leeming's distinction, where myth is, as we define it, stories of gods and heroes or significant stories we tell our children, while mythology refers to either the systematic academic study of myths or the group of myths that make up a culture's full listing or canon of accepted mythic stories, such as Greek, Roman, or Egyptian mythology, all referring to the collection of those stories that the Greeks or Romans hold as their own explanations of the origin of everything. Leeming calls attention to a myth's ideological aspect, which is the origin of something. So history, philosophy, theology, or science, also known as cosmology, all have this explanatory aspect. But myth goes more deeply towards explaining the unexplainable. Out of these stories come rituals, acts, and actions that are still an integral part of modern-day religions. As an object of study, myths express, summarize, or reflect a social ethos, a zeitgeist, or a symbol of a time. Another aspect of the study of myths is the story's ability to delineate belonging to a group. One's belief in a story marks one's belonging. One's understanding of the deeper significance and meaning of the story, its tropological or anagogical meaning, also marks one as belonging. If I refer to a story about a god that you don't know, then you are left out of my evocation of that image, that metaphor, in not understanding it, which marks you as not belonging. Myths then must be true in some higher sense, lifting the ideas and understanding to something higher, conveying information that doesn't represent mere pagan superstitions, but are our way of understanding the world, and therefore our culture's explanation of these less tangible meanings formed by us out of this chaos we've been born into. It not only creates the social ethos, but forms our understanding of what it means to be us in this case. As you consider the definitions from Leeming, which aspect of these definitions and presentation mythology stand out to you? If you had to quickly define myth, what aspects of the definition of myth would you think most important to your definition? The origins of the subject of the story, gods or heroes, the meaning and effect of the myth. Definitions evolve. Starting with one definition doesn't mean that you won't have a more nuanced or more useful definition the more you study mythology. So start with something basic, something you can work with. and revise the definition from there. Things to consider as you draft a working definition to go forward. Leeming says that myths are stories that helped our ancestors understand the world around them and inside them. Others say that myths are a special kind of story that have both significance or meaning and staying power or the ability to be perpetuated. We can understand that to mean relevance over time for whatever reason. A dictionary definition would simply point to tradition, implying exaggeration of history that is told about an event in some part of the world. This gets at the idea that Zeus or Thor were at one time real people who became legends and then gods over time. Some definitions go so far as to state how myths explain our rights and different phenomena of nature. So the Titans, as the forces of nature, end up being Zeus as the god of lightning or Thor as the god of thunder. These are the origins of lightning and thunder. These are the origin aspects of myth, and they're always present. Here's another dictionary definition to consider: adding hero or event, adding demigods, and a phenomenon of nature. But this presentation only scratched the surface of the definitions of myth. The definitions and distinctions of Joseph Campbell and Bruce Lincoln will be presented in future presentations.